Today we're going to talk about how the super rich were raised, right? Sounds like that's an intriguing topic right off the get-go. And we'll also dive into why all the wealthy, all the super rich at least, are self-employed, how they make their decisions, and this is the most, to me at least, the most psychologically interesting part, the 5 personality traits of the super rich. I'm here with Dr. and please help me with your name. It's Rainer Zitelmann, is that right?
Yes, the pronunciation in the United States is this way, Rainer Zitelmann. In German, it's different, but Rainer Zitelmann is okay.
You're very forgiving. Thank you. And, you interviewed 45 and you define them as the wealth elites. And this is a very interesting sort of in-depth profile, I think is a fair way of calling it, of 45 folks who really are in the not just well off, not just affluent, but in the tens or hundreds of millions. If I'm getting that correct, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Most of them had a net worth between 30 million and 1 billion euro, and there were some in the poorer group between 10 and 30, more like 30. There were even some multi-billionaires in this group. But this is the difference between this book and other books. Maybe you know this book by Thomas Stanley, The Millionaire Mind or The Millionaire Next Door, a great book. But this book was about, as the title suggests, Millionaire Next Door. So I think his interviewers had a net worth of like $3 or $4 million. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about the ultra high net worth individuals.
Sure. And there's some really, really great lessons or information in here. I'd love to dive into those. And at the end, I'd like to get your take based on what you've learned about how we can apply this to ourselves, of course, being very self-interested.
Sure. Yes.
And of course, as parents, what lessons can we take from this in terms of how we raise our children, yeah?
Okay.
But first, can you talk a little bit about yourself, about your background? My understanding is you're both a historian and a sociologist? Yeah, please.
Yes, that is correct. I'm a historian. I studied history and politics, and I was assistant professor at the university in Berlin here. Then I moved to a newspaper. I worked for one of the leading German newspapers, and in the end, I was there in charge for the real estate topics. But then in 2000, I founded my own company. I became an entrepreneur. It was the leading company in the public relation company that was focused on the real estate industry. And I made a lot of money at this time, and I invested this money in the Berlin residential market. And it was a great time to invest because it was very cheap at this time. But
When was that? What year, roughly?
I started in 2000, yes.
Cool.
And then now in the last years where everyone wanted to invest there, I sold most of it, like a contrarian approach. Maybe later we can speak about this also, because this is also a very important aspect, how to become rich, that you don't swim, that you like to swim against the stream.
Right, for sure. So before we dive into all those elements you mentioned, why did you decide to conduct this study? And you did, the first 100 so pages, you describe your methodology, and it's really interesting how you go about it. But let's get into the why first. What made you decide to do this, conduct the study?
Yes, before I wrote this book, I wrote a lot of other books. Now I have book 23. And the book that I wrote before this, the title was how to, it's not in English so far, but the title was like how to grow and stay rich. And when I wrote this book, I looked whether there's any academic research about it, because there are so many self-help books, how to get rich in 7 years or the 8 steps to get rich and so on. There are so many, I think thousands all over the world. But this was not what I was looking for. I was looking for real academic research, a scientific approach. And I found that is almost nothing, not only in United States, but also in Europe. There were only a few studies, and there was one doctoral dissertation. It was they interviewed in Germany also 470 people with a net worth between 1 and 2 million. So this is what I call the millionaire next door. The title of this book by Thomas Stanley, a great book. But his book was also not about the ultra high net worth individuals, but about the millionaire next door. And so what I saw there, a gap in the research to have an analysis about the connection between whether there's a connection between the personality traits of super rich people on the one hand and their financial success on the other hand. And this was one reason. And the other reason, I grow rich myself. I became rich with my investments and as an entrepreneur. And so I understood and I knew how it worked for me, but I was curious how it was with other people, whether this was similar with them or different, and I wanted to learn more about them. And so it was very interesting, because I spoke with every one of these people between 1 and 2 hours, and in the end I had 1,700 pages transcriptions with these interviews.
Did you find that your own personal success, your own pedigree, as it were, in business, did that open any doors for you, or perhaps make the interviews a little bit more free-flowing or open than they may have been? I mean, I know it's hard to say, but if you had been merely, I hate to say merely, but just purely an academic rather than a fellow business entrepreneur, do you think that helped at all in terms of conducting the study?
Absolutely. I think otherwise it wouldn't be possible to have the study. 2 reasons. First, how did I start? I knew some of them, and then they recommended me to others, to their friends. They told their friends, you can trust him. For example, I know one billionaire. He's from Germany, but he lives in Switzerland. And then he had another friend, also billionaire, who lives also in Switzerland. And so he recommended him to make this interview with me. And so trust is very important. They were anonymous interviews. I had to guarantee every one of them that I will not mention their name. But on the other hand, it was important that they understood this is not somebody maybe like an left-leaning journalist who tries to make any bad story about how bad capitalists are or something, but someone who's really interested to understand it and who will be fair. So sure, it helped.
And you mentioned that in your methodology, which I thought was interesting, how I don't understand the exact details, but how you necessarily had to frame your questions or tease them out a certain way to avoid any, I think you termed it social pressure bias, or fear of
yes.
Coming off as a rich jerk kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. So what was very important that I recorded this interviews, but they were not allowed to change anything after this, because if I would have done so, I knew it from this time when I was a journalist. Then in the end, it gets to any maybe PR people in their PR department or something like this, and then you get a lot of good sounding phrases or bullshit, yes, and this wouldn't make any sense. And it was very important how you raise the questions and that they know that it's confidential, so that they can speak more free and honest.
Very good. All right, so why don't we start off with we're talking about the wealth elite, but why don't we start off with the definition so that we all are on the same page and just make sure we know what we're talking about here? Yeah.
Yes. As mentioned, most of them have a net worth between 30 million and 1 billion. There were a few who had only between 10 and 30 million, but more like 30. And I will explain the difference between these people and the millionaire next door. Take someone who has a net worth of 1 billion. If he's able to get a yield of 3% after taxes, yes, mm-hmm. This would mean $30,000 the year. It's like $2,500 the month. I think this is not like rich people want to live. So you are not rich if you have 1 billion, in my definition. If you have 20 million, yes, then it means you can spend with the same yield or interest rate of 3% after taxes, you have 50,000 the month. And I think with $50,000 a month, you can live. Even you can rent my apartment in New York, where you have to pay 10,000. Sorry, yes. And so I think it's a difference. And so for me, in my definition, this rich people, it starts only with a double-digit million. Most of them had some hundred of millions.
I mean, to be fair, having $1 million and $2,000 a month in passive income is not poor by any means, but we're kind of cutting off at, you can live not just comfortably, but pretty, I guess, luxuriously on just your passive investments. Yeah, that seems to be the cutoff.
Yes.
Yeah? Very
yes,
good.
Exactly.
Very good. Okay, so let's start with the formative years, please. So, I mean, the question that seems to be answered is, how were the super rich raised? And you kind of seem to cut this into a couple of sections where we talk about how they were parented, their schooling, and a little bit about sports. So, however you'd like to begin.
Yes, let's start with their parents. I asked them about the profession of their parents, and to sum up, most of them had a middle class background. There were only two with working class background, and there were only very few who had really rich parents. But most of them were middle class. But most of them self-employed as entrepreneur, but more like little entrepreneur with maybe 3 or 4 employees or something like this. So the middle class, this was typical. And what was very interesting for me, I asked them about their performance at school or university. I wanted to find out whether there's a relationship between their performance at school and university on the one hand and their financial success on the other hand. And there was absolutely no correlation. Some of the richest in this group even had no high school degree. And there were some of them who were very good at school, some of them not. But those who were best at school were not among the richest of my interviewers. So to make it short, there was absolutely no correlation. But what was much more important is what they did alongside school, outside school and university, especially 2 things. You mentioned one, half of them were competitive athletes. And I think this was very important for them because they learned how to deal with victory, and was much more important, maybe we can speak later more about it, how to deal with defeats. This was very important for them. And the other thing was, I asked them how did they earn money when they were at school or university. When I was a student, most of the other students, they worked, some in a factory, some in a restaurant, some as taxi drivers, but most of them for an hourly wage. And this is exactly what the super rich people did not. They didn't work for an hourly wage, but a lot of them were engaged in sales. They sold so many things. They had so much fantasy what things to sell, used cars or used wheel rims, or one wrote a book about how to tune motorcycles and sold this book. Another raised animals and sold animals. Some sold insurance policies or real estate investment funds or whatever. So a lot of had early experience in sales. This was important, or other early entrepreneurial experience. And I think these things, the experience as competitive athletes on the one hand, and in sales or as entrepreneur on the other hand, were very important. And I can explain you why. Because you have to understand that in psychology, we distinguish between 2 ways how you can learn. The one way you call explicit learning. It's what you learn at school or university, or you can call it book wisdom. And the other way is implicit learning. So it's what you can call as well learning by doing, or the school of life, or street smart. And a lot of intellectuals, they don't understand that these are these two ways of learning. They only know about their way of book wisdom, and they look down a little bit on people who haven't read as many books as they have read. But for these people, this implicit learning was much more important than the things they learned at school or university. And I think this is another point we can speak later about this, about that decision making, because this has a lot of to do how they make their decisions. But I think there's a further question of you. Maybe later.
Let me just roll back a little bit. There's an important point for any skeptical listeners that you completely acknowledge and address in your study, that in your book, that there are only 45 participants in these interviews, and that that you acknowledge that it's not necessarily statistically significant. So take this for what it's worth, but at the same time, have anyone who's skeptical understand that any study of the ultra wealthy will be a small sample size almost by definition. So, you just have to sort of go with it a little bit there.
Yes, sure. It would be great if you would have a sample, that is statistically relevant about this group, but there is nowhere. And so for this group, in sociology, we distinguish between two different approaches, with this quantitative methods or with qualitative methods. And this is a qualitative study. And the professor, it was my second doctoral dissertation, and he told me in the beginning that I have to find 25 people, because this is usually the amount of people, 25. And so I was proud to find not only 25 but 45. And I even think I could have found more, but then I saw that it repeats again and again the same stuff. And I think it wouldn't have made a difference if I would have, for example, found 60, because it was then repeating the same and the same. And if I give my lectures, I always ask people, if you want to grow rich and you would have the opportunity to speak with 45 super rich people in the next 3 months about their childhood, about their biography, about their attitude, about their experience, and you could speak with everyone 1 and 2 hours, who would do this? And everyone raises his hand if I have my lectures. But then if I ask the next question, who knows so many people who belong to this category? No one raised. And this is, I did it for you, or I did it for these people who don't have the possibility to speak with these people. But there's I appreciate that you mentioned this. There's a big part, 1/3 of the book, about methodology, where I explain what are the limits of such a study and what you can find out. And I think it's only a first step. I hope that there will be a lot of other students in this field of academic wealth research that is quite a new field, to have much more other studies.
So I want to spin this to you a little bit, just to have a little bit of fun here. What were your grades like in school?
Yes, it was very changing. Some years I was one of the best at school, but then in the last at the gymnasium I was. I left school and come 1 year later because I had a lot of very other interests. But then if I was at university, I was definitely the best, because I had the best grades, and with my doctoral dissertation, it was better than the best, like you call it summa cum laude. So in this way, I'm a little bit exception. Maybe this is the reason I'm a multimillionaire but not a billionaire.
It does fit the results of your book. So another interesting thing about the competitive sports I thought was interesting was that you noted that most of them were in individual sports rather than team sports. I thought that was interesting. Just for anyone who doesn't understand, more like fencing or wrestling, or is that correct? Those types of sports rather than soccer or rugby, things like that.
Yes, there were both, but a little bit more in individual. Yes, I think because I think not every one of them is a good team player. Yes,
Not very agreeable.
sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes they are difficult people. Yes, and who have who are engaged in conflicts and problems with other people. Maybe this is something we can speak about later, and maybe this was the reason why they became entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to jump into next. You point out that the cohort, I guess, is 100% self-employed. That you rarely see such uniformity, and the reasons for such self-employment you kind of cut into three different explanations, which I found really interesting. Would you like to explain those the three reasons why all of the uber wealthy are self-employed?
Yes, maybe let's come first to another point. As you mentioned, this is not a statistical or relevant research. So we all know that there are some very super rich people who are not self-employed, like CEOs of big companies, for example. But I think this is a big mistake that a lot of people make. In the media, we can see and listen and read a lot about the CEOs who earn a lot of money, especially in the United States, because I think they have to publish how much they earn, and you can see it in the annual reports. But with all this others, 10,000s or 100,000s of rich people who are entrepreneurs, they don't have to publish it, how much they earn or about their net worth. And so this is the reason why some people overestimate how many people, how many CEOs, or maybe as well sportsmen or
Right.
Are rich they are, because you can read more about it. But it's a very big hidden group of entrepreneurs who have much more than these people about whom you can read in the media. This is, I think, one very important thing that a lot of people don't understand, because they confuse the reality on the one hand with this what they see in TV or media on the other hand. There's no statistic about it, but for Germany, for example, we have like 15,000 income millionaires, not millionaires. We have much more. We have some 800,000. But I speak about income millionaires, so people who earn at least 1 million a year. And from this 15,000, I would guess that there are less than 1,000 who work for, or only some hundreds who work as manager or CEOs of big companies. So that means all the others are entrepreneurs or investors. But you see it even if you look at the Forbes list of the richest Americans, for example, this Forbes 400. You will see almost all of them are either entrepreneurs or their parents were entrepreneurs. So like you see, if you speak about, for example, Zuckerberg from Facebook, or the Google founders, or Bill Gates, or Jeff Bezos, and all of them. And there are some very rich people in this list who are heirs, for example, but then their father, like from the Waltons, for example, made his money as an entrepreneur. So you see, the origin of the wealth is in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, entrepreneurship. And so I think it was but for my study, I excluded anyway people who inherited their wealth, because I wanted to find out whether there's a relationship between their psychology, their personality traits, and their financial success. And if I would have taken someone or interviewed who was only an heir who inherited his wealth, I couldn't find out anything about it.
I thought I read that you did have some inherited wealth in your cohort, but only if they had multiplied their inheritance many times over. Did I misread that?
Exactly. Yes, okay. Most of them not. But for example, if someone inherited 100 million and made 10 million out of it, you can't learn anything from him. Only how to lose money, yes. But for example, if someone inherited maybe 2 or 3 million and now today he has 100 or 200 million, then for me it's the same as someone who is self-made.
Sure, very good. What about the fact that you point out that most of these folks are, I think you describe them as extreme optimists, yeah?
Yes, I think this is no surprise that if you are extreme pessimist, I think you will not find a company or you will make no investment if you have maybe, every day you're absolute pessimist will never found a company. But what was more important for me is, and what was not so important, that they are optimists. This is true. You saw it as well with this psychological test that every one of them filled out. But what they understand with optimism, and optimism is not something like feeling that life is like a Hollywood movie where a happy end is guaranteed in the end. So it's not a naive optimism, but it was more something that psychologists will call self-efficacy. That means that they trust in their ability to solve problems. Yes, this is so more important to understand what they understand or what do they mean by optimism.
That makes me wonder, I don't remember if you touched on this, and I don't know if it's dangerous territory, but I wonder what percentage of your cohort were held strong religious beliefs. Many religions have sort of a predeterminism or a higher power versus a self.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah.
Yes, no, I didn't spoke with them. I started with some of them, but then I saw it was so different that I was sure that I couldn't find any common pattern, because there were some of them who with very strong religious beliefs and some others atheists. And so what was more important, that a lot of them believed in this, what you will call the power of positive thinking, or about the subconscious mind. There were a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them who did things not so different, like someone as Joseph Murphy or Napoleon Hill would recommend. So to program their subconscious mind with big goals. It was not for every one of them, but it was with a lot of them true.
Interesting. So one of the things that surprised me was when you touch on how the wealth elite make decisions. And I sort of went in to that section sort of assuming that there would be a lot of analytics and a lot of data almost universally, but you found that gut instinct played an important role for a lot of the wealth elite, yeah?
Yes, exactly. So this was one of the questions. Sure, every one of us uses both approaches to analyze things on the one hand, and sometimes to use our intuition, gut feeling on the other hand. But what I asked every one of them, what is more important if you make your economic or financial decision? Is it more analysis or is it more gut decision? And most of them, not all of them, but I think like 2/3 of them pointed out that gut decision is much more important for them. But now, the same as with optimism, you have to understand what is a gut decision, or what do I mean with intuition? Is it something like some people would think irrational or even mystical or so? No, this is not true. I spoke before about the difference between explicit learning and implicit learning. And this implicit learning, what is so important for them, this implicit learning leads to implicit knowledge. And implicit knowledge, it's only another word for gut feeling or for intuition. And so, it makes sense now. If I found out on the that book wisdom is not so important, that it was not important how they've been at school and university they performed, that it was not important, but that this implicit learning processes were very important. For example, what they learned in sales or what they learned with their early entrepreneurial activities. And then the result of this learning process, of this implicit learning, is this implicit knowledge, and then they call it gut feeling or intuition. So you says so it makes sense all if you bring it together. And I think it's logical. If the people who know most about economy would be the richest people, then every professor for economy would be super rich, but this is not the case. For example, I have a friend, and he's one of the best real estate expert. He's a professor, and he wrote a lot of books about real estate investments. And for a time, he even was, I think, chairman of one of the largest organizations for real estate researchers. But all I know from his own real estate investments was to say very, very poor, yes. And so you see, there's no relationship between it. And I have. There was another one of my interviews who became as well rich in the real estate industry, and he even couldn't read and write so good. He told me always he reads only the first and the last sentences of a letter, and then if it makes no sense, someone has to read it and to explain it for him. But he was almost a billionaire. So these people, yes, they analyze things if they the numbers have to be correct. But as one private equity investor told me, it's if he makes a decision for his private equity investments, it's all about people, whether he believe in the people or not. And he told me you can't make an audit or rating with numbers about this people. He told me then he trusts his gut feeling if he deals with his people.
I mean, the description I thought that made sense, the most sense about the gut feeling was that it's not, like you said, it's some supernatural power or anything like that, but rather like a built-up database within the brain or the nervous system of the entrepreneur through all the experiences, all the failures that they had gone through, and they're just merely accessing it in the form of an intuition or a gut feeling, and sort of drawing on that experience. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's in your subconscious mind, and sometimes you have more wisdom in your subconscious mind than in your conscious mind. And then in a second, you know what to do, but you can't tell someone else exactly why you know what to do. But it's like it's a good word, like a very big database that you can use, and these people learn how to use it.
So let's get into the real psychological and self-helpish kind of the fun part of this with the personality traits. So you kind of anchor this section with the big 5 personality traits, but I wasn't familiar with these big 5 personality traits. I've heard of things like Myers-Briggs and ENTJ, those other personality tests. Could you start off by explaining, is this a standard or a well-received?
Yes, it's absolutely a standard in psychology. You're right. There are a lot of different tests, but this we distinguish between 5 personality traits, and it's conscientiousness, it's openness for new experience, it's extraversion, and it's agreeableness, and it's neuroticism. And every one of them completed this big 5 personality test with 50 questions. I think it was the first time that a group of very rich people filled out completed such a big 5 personality test. And the result was that they have higher degree in conscientiousness, they are more open for new experience, they are higher degree in extroversion, but they are lower in neuroticism, what means more psychological stable than other people, and they are lower in agreeableness. They are not so harmony-oriented, but more engaged in conflicts. Maybe not everyone as Donald Trump is, for example, but some of them as well. And what was interesting, after I finished my study, there was another study also in Germany, and they interviewed a larger group of rich people. They were not as rich as my group. It was, again, like this in the single-digit millionaires. And they interviewed more than 100 of them, and everyone completed also a Big Five personality test, not with this 50 questions like my interviewers did, but a shorter one. But the result was exactly the same. The result was exactly the same. So, but these are only the results of this test, and I think there are some more things that were not a part of this test, personality traits that is very important. And I want to point out two of them especially. And the one is what is very important, how they deal with defeats and setbacks. And the other thing is is that what I mentioned before, the non-conformism, that they love to swim against the stream. And maybe we can talk about both of these things as well, because these aspects were very important.
Yeah, for sure. Why don't we start off with the well, before we move on, I just want to point out, maybe you've heard this. I've heard, or I think I read somewhere, that in terms of agreeableness, there's almost like this inverse relationship where the less agreeable you are, the more likely you are to succeed as an entrepreneur. But it's almost the opposite within a corporation or a larger organization, where you need a high level of agreeableness to sort of go with the flow and of the organization or the culture, as it were. Yeah.
Absolutely, this sounds logical for me. If you want to make your career in a big company, and you are, even look at the example from Steve Jobs. You know, he was one very conflict oriented and absolutely not someone what you call agreeable or harmony seeking, and he was fired, as you know, in his own company. Then in the end, he had to leave his own company because of this. And for Bill Gates, it's the same, but they couldn't fire him because it was his own company. And I've written another book, by the way, that will be published by the end of the year. The title is the title is Dare to be Different and Grow Rich, and this is about the biographies of these people. And you find there a lot of these people where, you know, like even Warren Buffett, when he was young, was a very difficult person. Maybe
I've heard,
not later in his life, but early in his life at school, and so it was so extremely difficult. And maybe this is the reason in some ways why they founded their own company. Because if one of them told me, if I would have to work in a large company, they would have to give me pills every day.
I mean, maybe that's the sort of ideal combination where your second to third and middle layers of management have a bit more agreeableness to keep the organization running smoothly. But at the upper echelons, you need that perhaps the disagreeable, the contentious entrepreneur to really move the company in a direction, perhaps. Just throwing that out there, yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the so yes, you mentioned the non-conformity, and you kind of break that down into the two types, which I thought was interesting. The two different types of non-conformists.
Yes, first of all, I see that you read my book very thoroughly. This is not, I had a lot of interviews, and for some I had the impression they only had read the title or so. So I see you read it very thoroughly.
It's very interesting. I mean,
yes, yes, thank you very much for this, and I hope a lot of people in our audience will do the same.
Totally.
And by the way, that I don't forget it. Every Monday I have in America in Forbes.com I have a column, and I hope everyone will read it. Today I had a new one. Yes, it's every Monday morning you will find me. If you give my name Forbes.com, you will see it. But only by the way. Yes. So now I interrupt myself. I lost my.
The two types of nonconformists.
The two types. Okay. There's one type of nonconformist who even enjoy swimming against the stream, who like to disagree with others.
It's almost like part of their identity. Yeah.
Yes, I will take someone as an example. As mentioned, the interviewers were anonymous, but there was two exceptions because the leading German weekly magazine, they had a big story about the book, and they wanted to have two interviews with two persons with pictures, and I asked some of them who would agreed with this, and one of them, it was one of the richest, is a multi-billionaire, and he earned his money with milk and with yogurt. He started with only 4 employees. Today he has almost 30,000 employees and between 4 and 5 million euro. And he told me this funny story. It's about cows, what is not surprising because cows are his favorite animals. And the story goes like this: there's a path, and on this path there's a herd of 100 cows. And on the left side there's a very lush green field, and on the right side there's a field that is not as near as lush as the other. There are only some grams of grass on the right side. And 99 out of this 100 cows go to the left side. And what happens, the ass is eaten very quickly, and only one cow goes to the right side, and this cow eats and eats and eats while the other cows have no more. And this is a funny story, but that this is the type of person. He told me, I'm the cow who goes to the right side, who enjoys swimming against the stream. And even if they see that the majority thinks similar to them, they don't feel it then as a confirmation for their thing, but they start to become skeptical if they see that other people think the same way like them. Maybe I have a mistake, maybe it's better to sell. And one told me he was at the bank, and if this people from bank told me that this investment is a absolutely crazy idea, yes, then he went out of the bank and said, so now I knew exactly that this was a great idea. So this kind of people. But then there's another kind of people who are also non-conformists, but not in this way, that they enjoy swimming against the stream. They don't care about the opinion of other people. Sometimes they act with the stream, sometimes against it, often against it, but it's more that they don't care about it. That's for them. It's not important what other people. So it's not something where they have fun with to disagree. But these are the two different types of non-conformists. But I think generally spoken, it's logical if you do the same things in the same way like everyone else, you will not get other results than anyone else. You cannot expect to become super rich if you do the same things, and it fits to my own experience. So it's made sense for me. It sounds logical because I became rich myself with this contrarian investments here in the real estate market in Berlin. For example, there was a time when I bought, I remember, a multi-family house here in Berlin, what was called a very bad location in Berlin. And at this time, everyone told me to buy, to invest in residential real estate in Germany. It's a bad idea. In Berlin, it's worse. And in this location, it's absolutely crazy. But because everyone thought so, I could buy it very cheaply with a multiplier of 6.8, what's the same like a yield of 15%. And I bought it for $1 million. And 10 years later, when everyone wanted to invest there and it became fashion, everyone wanted to invest in Berlin residential market, then I sold it for 4.2 million. And this was only one. I make many investments in this way. When and in the beginning, when I bought this multifamily house, first I asked Deutsche Bank to give me a loan, and then first I spoke with them. And then no, we can't do it. It's such a, please excuse. There we can't work with you together. With this, they did tell me it's a crazy idea, but I saw him in his face that he thought it's a crazy idea. But it's a experience from a lot of rich people. Some years ago, I met Jim Rogers. Maybe you know him. He lived in New York and then moved to Singapore. Jim Rogers, he is a famous commodity investor, and he made his. Maybe you are too young to know him, because in the 80s he became very rich. He raised the quantum fund together with George Soros, and in the same time, when the S&P gained 47%, his fund gained 4,200%, and so he became super rich very early. And then he it's interesting what he did with his money. He traveled with his motorcycle 2 years in 120 countries all over the world. So he's in the Guinness Book of Records. And he told me the same story. He was always a contrarian. And when he was young, he told me this story. He was sitting there in New York, where you're based, with a lot of bankers, and all of them were much older than him. And at this time, he invested in locker chairs, and at this time you could read every day bad news about this company. And then one of these older people from bankers at the table, he spoke to another. How can someone be so crazy to invest in this locker chairs? And all people laughed, and it was about him. And he told me at this time it was not very comfortable for him that everyone laughed about him. But I think there's a saying similar in English: "Who laughs at last laughs
best." Yeah.
Best, and this is so you find a lot of examples for this contrarian approach.
Now, I want to point out a caveat that you mention in your book that I think is worth noting here. You point out very clearly that just because these personality traits appear in these wealth elite, and just because these decisions or these sort of life choices resulted in wealth for them, does not necessarily translate into you becoming part of the wealth elite. I mean, you make great pains to point that out.
Absolutely, that's very important for me. Usually people who buy these books about how to get rich and so, what they are looking for is an easy recipe that someone else will tell them. You have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you will grow rich. And in a lot of cases, even the people who wrote these books are not rich. So
right.
I would have some doubts. Yes, if they know so good, yes, if you are so smart, why are you not rich? I would ask them. And on the other hand, it's the difference to my book. It's not a kind of academic research. So I recommend I cannot recommend my book to anyone who's looking for this easy recipe. Please don't buy this book. There are a lot of other books that you can buy. This is a book for people who like to think by themselves, yes. And I think this is the worth for you. If you read about the attitude and experience of these people, like maybe one point where we forgot to speak about now. Let's speak about this point: how to deal with defeats, for example. And then you compare your own attitude and your own way of thinking with them, and then start to think and find your own way. But a lot of people who want to get rich, they look for someone who gives them advice. Please buy this share or this, and if it works, they will be proud how clever they are. And if it don't work, they will blame someone else for this. And I think this is a difference between a lot of people and this rich people, because for a lot of people it's this way: if they are successful, they take responsibility for the success. But if they fail, they blame others. For example, if they were bad at school, the teacher's fault. Or if they didn't succeed in their company, their boss was not fair. Or if they don't succeed in life, it was maybe their parents' fault, or it's the capitalism fault, or whatever. So they have so many excuses. And for this super rich people, they thought absolutely different. They always took the blame for, especially for their, if there were a crisis or setback or failure, and this gave them the feeling of power. Because if it was me and I'm going to be to blame, then I can change it. It gives me the one who blame. You give the power, and so. This is only one example. If you then start to think about what is my attitude to failure, what is my attitude if I don't succeed, and if you compare it with them, you can start to think about, and absolutely you can learn a lot from them, but not in this way that you look for this easy recipe.
Yeah, the attitude is certainly important. It's also a matter of just numbers or odds. And I don't know if you've heard about this study. Somebody did a similar, lightly similar interviews with all of the richest Americans in each of the 50 states. And the only thing that was common to all 50 of them was that they had all failed multiple times before they had reached their success. And the lesson that was sort of drawn out of that is that it's very rare to hit it big on your first try at anything. Most people try, fail, and then just settle into a job or whatnot and don't try again. And it just as a matter of playing the odds, you almost you're not taking any other chances if you stop the first time you fail. Yeah.
I agree and disagree both with this statement. I agree this way that a lot of people, or everyone had setbacks, but that people failed in this way that, for example, their company went bankrupt or something like this. It happened for some, but there were others. Sure, everyone has setbacks in life. This is true, it's in common. But I don't know this study that you mentioned, but every time when someone tells me there's something that all 100% had in common, I have doubts. Because even with this 45 people I interviewed, there was not one point where I can say all rich people are the same in this. It's like not all poor people are the same. And if someone tells me all had this in common, I'm very skeptical whether this is a really, reliable and scientific study. Because in reality, in science, you don't have this 100% things. You have common patterns. Yes, and you have some correlations and so. But if people look, sure, first everyone would like to look what do they all have in common, 100%. But I guarantee everyone who will conduct a real, reliable scientific study will not find something what 100% of all people have in common.
That's a healthy skepticism. Absolutes are generally something that you should take a second look at. I totally agree. So let's get into let's begin to wrap up a little bit and talk about how this applies to ourselves and to our kids. I mean, this is all great information, but it kind of boils down to, so what? So what can we do with this great information that you've gathered for us? What conclusions can we draw and apply to our own lives and to our kids as parents for our kids? Yeah.
What is about yourself? I think we spoke a little about this, what it is not like an easy recipe, and what it is like gives you some material to think about yourself. But let's speak about the kids. We haven't spoken about this. And I think a lot of parents think that school and university is very, very important. And I will not say anything against it, but I think that it's overestimated, because we know the stories of a lot of even I read a book in the United States. I think the title was "Millionaire Dropouts" or something like this, and there were so many examples of millionaire dropouts or billionaire dropouts who left the school or broke up in the university and became rich. So if I think if we understand this two ways of learning that I mentioned before, this implicit learning and explicit learning. This is a key to understand what is important for your kids. Explicit learning. This is book wisdom, what you learn at school and university. It is important, but it's more important if you want to be an employee in a large company. And so then they will ask you for your degree and university, and the better the university, the better it is. But if you become the entrepreneur or investor and self-made and not to make a career in a large company, no one will ask you about your university, about your performance at university. But I think if it is about kids, to be honest, I don't have kids. I have to hurry to. Maybe I'm now 62, but my girlfriend is 28, so I have time to make some. Yes, but now I have no children. But if I would have children, I would look. I would see how important are this implicit learning experience. For example. That they learn maybe a musical instrument and learn the discipline there, or that they are engaged in competitive sports, or that they start to sell things, maybe at the start of the flea market or wherever, and to support them to have some maybe early entrepreneurial experience, especially with sales and so on, and not to focus only on book wisdom and on performance at school. I think those people who focus only at school and don't do anything alongside school, outside school, to earn money, especially with sales, I think it's not so likely that these people will become successful. So if I have my lectures, I always ask the people there in the room, who of you was was a salesperson outside school or outside university, or who was a competitive athlete and this. And for these people, I think it's more likely that you will get rich and super rich than someone who focuses only on book wisdom. And I think this should be very important to understand for parents.
I want to put some context on your opinions of university. So in the United States, as of now, I think the average cost of a 4-year degree is going to be well over $200,000. Right? Do you know what the average cost of a 4-year degree is in Germany, for example?
Yes, zero.
So even with a zero cost, you're still saying, so it's not even about the tuition cost or having to save for that. It's just about time and life experience that you're saying is not necessarily so valuable at university. Is that right?
Yes, and you see this in the group of my interviews. There were some who were very good at school, but others who even had no high school degree and so on. There's no relation. I think it's not a bad idea to study or so, but it's not for today. Everyone thinks he has to study, and there are too many parents who think their children should study to have a good opportunity in their life. But it's not the only way, and it's not for everyone the right way. For some people, there's the better way to get street smart by the school of life, and parents should support their children if they see that they have any hobbies or activities outside schools where they have a lot of discipline and they can learn a lot, and they should understand that in some ways it's maybe more important what they learn there than what they learn at university. If we speak about being self-employed or being an entrepreneur. If you want to make a career in a large company, sure, you have. They will ask you for this university degree. But as we had it before, it's not the way that is most likely to get super rich with a career in a large company, but it's more likely to get super rich if you found your own company and if you get self-employed.
Very good. I think that's a great point to wrap up. The book Wealth Elite has been available on Amazon. I think it's being re-released as a paperback recently. And the new book, The Power of Capitalism, is out. That also looks like a very interesting read, and it just I can't wait to talk about that one as well. And you said
yes, sure.
Forbes every Monday, is that right?
Yes, exactly. Every Monday morning you can read in Forbes. If you give them my name, Rainer Zitelmann, and Forbes, and you Google it, you can find it very easily.
Yeah, I'll make sure to add a link in the show notes. Otherwise,
that's great.
That's all we have. Don't hang up after we sign off. Just hang on. I'm just going to sign off to the listeners. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for the talk, and we'll talk again next time. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.